I'm James Cuby, and this is Foundation and Fire. I'm going to present John Calvin's Doctrine of Schism, hopefully in about 10 minutes. If you want to look at a kind of deeper dive, I've done a part 1 and a part 2 on the channel, but this is an overview. What does Calvin affirm? What does he deny about schism? Because I think in the Presbyterian and Reformed world, especially in the Presbyterian world, this is sort of where we are. This is our history of separating and reuniting. And so Calvin's first affirmation, I guess his first denial, is that he's against ecclesiological donatism. He writes, "In bearing with imperfections of life, we ought to be far more considerate. Here the descent is very slippery, and Satan ambushes us with no ordinary devices, for there have always been those who, imbued with a false conviction of their own perfect sanctity, spurned association with all men, in whom they discern any remnant of human nature." He's asking, which sin is the one that you want to lift up and to use as a tool to separate from brothers? It might be sexuality. Well, what about divorce? What about divorce among your members, right? The reminder from Paul is that all have sinned and fallen short, and we are not to let sin reign in our mortal bodies. So he is against a kind of donatism where the holiness, the almost or perfect holiness of the church and her ministers is the only condition for church unity. Next, Calvin looks at mutual forbearance. He is for mutual forbearance. Here he cites Augustine again, who speaks wisely and well. "The godly manner and measure of church discipline ought at all times to be concerned with the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. This precept of mutual forbearance the apostle ordered to be kept. This principle they prostitute to the sacrilege of schism, and the occasion for cutting off the brethren from the fellowship." He has the Anabaptists in mind, and this principle of mutual forbearance for Calvin is to be seen against the background of schism, which he would describe as like the sin of divorce, right? Something to not be entered into lightly, if at all, and only really on the far end of having done everything in one's power to remain and to forgive and to be faithful and to trust and hope for God's peaceable work in a very difficult relationship. Right? Insofar as it depends on us, live peaceably with all people. Calvin next is for the prophets, against schism. This is maybe his most powerful objection to anyone who would break fellowship, even in radically difficult ecclesial situations. "Still the prophets," he writes, "did not because of this establish new churches for themselves or erect new altars. But whatever men were like, because the prophets considered that the Lord had set his word among them," right, the preaching of the word, "and had instituted rites, the administration of the sacraments, wherewith he was worshipped there, they stretched out clean hands to him in the midst of the assembly of the wicked. Nothing, consequently, kept them from creating a schism, save their zeal to maintain unity." Calvin goes on and says, right, the prophets, they had scruples against separating themselves under those conditions. "We claim too much for ourselves if we dare to withdraw at once from the communion of the church because the morals do not meet our standard, or the profession, the doctrine, does not meet our standard." The counsel here is to slow down, trust the word and the Spirit to do its work of reform and renewal. Remember that in Calvin's own case, the Genevan Council was a kind of constant thorn in his side. He never really got what he wanted from the Genevan Council. That was a reform that did not go through, kind of even in his own lifetime, the state really reaching into the life of the church. Calvin is against, I want to be careful here, the idea that 100% unity is possible. He writes, "They," the Roman Catholic Church, "suppose that the truth does not abide in the church unless there is agreement among the pastors, and that the church itself exists only if it becomes visible in general councils. Yet this is far from having always been true. The prophets have left us true testimonies of their times. Christ's prayer in John 17 is that we would be one. Right? He prays this, and the Father hears that prayer. It is also true that the prophets, Jesus, and the apostles prophesied, predicted that the church would go through periods where the defection was radical and almost complete, and that there would be a remnant even within a larger body that was very different in doctrine and in morals from that remnant. So the counsel is to stay, to remain, to be faithful, not to retreat or retrench. Finally, Calvin speaks about church discipline. He's for it, right? He's for it. He's against, though, compulsion. Right? If we're looking for a condition under which you could separate and then start a new church, it's really at the point of compulsion. And here's how he describes that. When they, Roman Catholic Church, wish to constrain us to the communion of their church, they demand two things of us. The first is that we should participate in all their prayers, sacraments, and ceremonies, that we should, right? Not that there's freedom not to. The second, that we should grant to their church every honor, power, and jurisdiction that Christ gives to the church. The chief point of the whole question, they were not compelled, the prophets, and now also us, to any superstitious worship. Indeed, they were obligated to nothing that had not been instituted by God. So do we, Calvin would ask, still have freedom of conscience, the local church level, to worship according to what God has instituted in his word? And we should be reminded at this point, this Reformation-level event, Calvin kind of refounding God's church on the word, that for Calvin, church discipline is not a third mark of the church. And so if it is lifted into our discussions at the national level, we may be highlighting kind of one sin or one set of sins over against others, and using that highlight, that way in which we highlight something, to create division in the body when we should wait and be faithful. But of course, there can come a point where churches and pastors are compelled against their conscience. I think even then, though, Calvin is saying you should remain, be faithful, and wait to be excommunicated. Thank you again for joining me. If this has been helpful to you, I ask you to like and to subscribe. Throw your comments or questions in the box below. I am a local pastor, so I'll answer them in good time, and would encourage you to share this with others as we all kind of discern in the Presbyterian and Reformed world how to live out our unity in Christ and how to keep from committing the sin of schism insofar as it lies with us.